Good morning. Welcome to Iron Sharpens Iron. My name is Jeremy Nettles. I am the evangelist for the River Ridge Church of Christ that meets in Newburgh, Indiana at 5600 Van Road. We would love to have you join us every Sunday morning at 10 for our regular Sunday worship period. We also have classes that begin at 9 and then an afternoon worship period that begins at 4 p.m. We would love to have you join us for any and all of those, as well as for our 6:30 p.m. Wednesday Bible study. You can get in touch with us by phone at 812-550-6234 or send an email to info@riverridgechurch.org, and we would love to hear from you. Longtime viewers of the program are well aware of our most ambitious project, which has been to cover all the books of the Bible. We started with broad overviews of the whole Bible, then each testament, then each section, law, history, gospels, letters, that sort of thing, and finally considering a book at a time. In the course of the series, which is available in full in a playlist on our YouTube channel, we've generally been able to dive into a book with at most a few minutes set aside for establishing context and interpretive principles. But there's one book that requires a far greater degree of focus on context. Revelation. Now, the strictest and most zealous school of thought regarding biblical interpretation holds essentially that one ought to interpret the Bible literally, unless the text requires a figurative interpretation. In principle, this is basically correct, but it's very easy to take it too far, because A, who decides whether the text requires a figurative interpretation? If the text just came out and said, these next 3 chapters are figurative, well, then, in interpreting them figuratively, we'd actually be adhering to a literalist interpretation, just applying the context. God often does tell us when he means something figuratively, but a lot of times he doesn't. And sometimes there's disagreement about whether he even has said that it's figurative or not. Even when we can all agree that a given passage is figurative, then there has to be some discussion about what symbolizes what, and we still don't agree. That's all just the first problem. That was A. B. Everything is symbolic to some degree. Letters and words are symbols that stand for real things. But the letters and the words are not themselves the real things. They just call the real things to your mind. That's what a symbol is. That's what it does. Now, of course, that's a bit reductive, but so is the inclination toward hyperliteralism. I'd like to further warn you against this approach with a few brief selections from Revelation. Let's kick it off with chapter 8, verses 10 and 11. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. 1/3 of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water because it had been made bitter. Is this hyperliteral? If it is, then I've got some more questions for you, but if it's not, then, well, what symbolizes what? It's not immediately apparent, is it? Chapter 9, verse 7. In appearance the locusts were like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were what looked like crowns of gold. Their faces were like human faces. Their hair like women's hair, and their teeth like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the noise of their wings was like the noise of many chariots with horses rushing into battle. They have tails and stings like scorpions, and their power to hurt people for 5 months is in their tails. Grasshoppers with scorpion stings and breastplates and human faces. Surely this is figurative, right? But then we're left still with the question of what does it symbolize? What does this mean? And at least just from this short passage, it's not immediately clear, is it? Chapter 16, verse 13. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. Because, that's usually how unclean spirits appear. We're really just scratching the surface here. This book is full of symbols and allegories and allusions, and metaphors and personification, and probably other poetic literary devices that escape me. It's a fool's errand trying to interpret any written work without giving thought to its context. But what context needs to be considered? Well, several kinds, including the text itself. Usually within just 2 or 3 verses before or after the one in question, something is found that destroys the more wackadoodle interpretations. Also, the historical context is important. When certain things went without saying for the author and the audience, we will be hamstrung in our effort to understand if we don't know those things that went without saying. Also, the literary tradition comes into play. When the text in question assumes that its audience is familiar with not just historical, cultural phenomena, but also specific written works from the past, even the remote past, well, we're going to be pretty confused if we don't track down those old writings and familiarize ourselves with them first. For example, Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. When he opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures, saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine." When he opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed with him. And they were given authority over 1/4 of the earth, to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. Well, that's all. I mean, whose side exactly are these horsemen on? And what exactly is it that they're doing? Or what does this represent if it's not literal? Well, we would be stuck just twiddling our thumbs, except that in Zechariah chapter 1, we read in verses 8 through 10, "I saw in the night, and behold, a man riding on a red horse. He was standing among the myrtle trees in the glen, and behind him were red, sorrel, and white horses. Then I said, What are these, my lord? The angel who talked with me said to me, I will show you what they are. So the man who was standing among the myrtle trees answered, These are they whom the Lord has sent to patrol the earth." Also, chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. "Again I lifted my eyes and saw, and behold, 4 chariots came out from between 2 mountains, and the mountains were mountains of bronze. The first chariot had red horses, the second black horses, the third white horses, and the 4th chariot dappled horses, all of them strong. Then I answered and said to the angel who talked with me, What are these, my lord? And the angel answered and said to me, These are going out to the 4 winds of heaven, after presenting themselves before the Lord of all the earth." Revelation chapter 13 shows us another one of these. "And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority." So exactly what this beast is and why it seems to be composed of several different animals is, well, rather unclear. But then if we turn back to Daniel chapter 7, we read, beginning in verse 2, "Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion." Verse 5, "And behold another beast, a second one like a bear." Verse 6, "After this I looked, and behold another like a leopard." Verse 7, "After this I saw in the night visions, and behold a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth, it devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Again, this doesn't completely answer it, but it gives us a pretty good start, doesn't it? In Revelation chapter 21, let's read verse 10. "And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain, and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God." Verse 12, "It had a great high wall with 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and on the gates the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel were inscribed. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. Verse 15, "And the one who spoke with me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city and its gates and walls." And this time we turn to Ezekiel, and we'll begin in chapter 40, where verses 2 and 3 read, "In visions of God he brought me to the land of Israel, and set me down on a very high mountain, on which was a structure like a city to the south. When he brought me there, behold, there was a man whose appearance was like bronze, with a linen cord and a measuring reed in his hand, and he was standing in the gateway." This section continues for the next 9 chapters, and we'll skip to the end of that, chapter 48 of Ezekiel, and pick up in verse 30. These shall be the exits of the city. On the north side, which is to be 4,500 cubits by measure, 3 gates. The gate of Reuben, the gate of Judah, and the gate of Levi, the gates of the city being named after the tribes of Israel. On the east gate, which is to be 4,500 cubits, 3 gates. The gate of Joseph, the gate of Benjamin, and the gate of Dan. On the south side, which is to be 4,500 cubits by measure, 3 gates. The gate of Simeon, the gate of Issachar, the gate of Zebulun. On the west side, which is to be 4,500 cubits, 3 gates. The gate of Gad, the gate of Asher, the gate of Naphtali. The circumference of the city shall be 18,000 cubits, and the name of the city from that time on shall be, The Lord is there. So again, this is not exactly the same picture, but it's pretty clear that the one in Revelation is derived from the one in Ezekiel. So these Old Testament writings seem, well, kind of important, don't they? In fact, Revelation quotes or alludes to the Old Testament at a higher rate than any other New Testament book, and it's not close. I once went through and cataloged all of these references, and then I broke it down by Old Testament references per 1,000 words. Revelation sits at about 25 Old Testament references per 1,000 words. The next closest is Hebrews with 17. And third place goes to 1 Peter with 12. The average is 6, and Revelation was 25, more than 4 times the average density of Old Testament quotations. Now, I still don't have an answer to every question about Revelation, but I can tell you for sure you will not understand it very well at all without the Old Testament. To most early Christians, the Old Testament was their only Bible. They found Jesus throughout it, and it didn't become fashionable to write off the Old Testament as sort of second-class scripture until pretty recently. The Old Testament provides not only precedent, but often clear explanations for the symbolism that we find in Revelation. Why wouldn't you want to make use of God's help to understand this most difficult book of the Bible? Any modern interpreter who explains Revelation in a halfway decent manner must make use of the Old Testament, even if he doesn't tell you that he's doing it. Let's consider a few examples more deeply. We'll go into more detail about 2 of those that I already introduced a few minutes ago, but let's start instead at the very beginning of Revelation, of the visions, the second vision rather, in Revelation, chapter 4. After this I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this. At once I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven, with one seated on the throne. And he who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian. And around the throne was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones were 24 elders, clothed in white garments, with golden crowns on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder, and before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was, as it were, a sea of glass, like crystal, and around the throne, on each side of the throne, are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. The first living creature like a lion, the second living creature like an ox, the third living creature with the face of a man, and the fourth living creature like an eagle in flight. And the 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around and within, and day and night they never cease to say, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who is seated on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who is seated on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne, saying, Worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. So the setting here is fairly obvious. This is heaven's throne room, and in it we find lots of symbols and quite a few characters. One seems pretty obvious, the one who is sitting on the throne. But as for his surroundings, well, who are they, and what are they, and why are they there, and what does it all mean? Well, we can start to unpack this just by turning to Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. There are a lot of common elements here, aren't there? First of all, we've got God sitting on his throne, obviously, in his throne room, and we've got these, well, let's say living creatures who are surrounding the throne with wings and such, but that's just scratching the surface. In fact, if we turn to Ezekiel, we will find some more help in chapter 1. Pick up in verse 4. As I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the midst of the fire, as it were, gleaming metal. And from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures. And this was their appearance. They had a human likeness, but each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. Each one of them went straight forward without turning as they went. As for the likeness of their faces, each had a human face. The 4 had the face of a lion on the right side, the 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and the 4 had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces, and their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wings of another, while 2 covered their bodies. Jump to verse 26. And above the expanse over their heads there was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like sapphire, and seated above the likeness of a throne was a likeness with a human appearance. And upward from what had the appearance of his waist I saw as it were gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire enclosed all around. And downward from what had the appearance of his waist I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and there was brightness around him, like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain. So was the appearance of the brightness all around. It's the same picture, and yet this time it's not heaven's royal court. Instead, it is, well, it's below that expanse, the sea of glass, as John termed it in Revelation. This time it's a sort of a mobile throne, as if God is on the warpath in a chariot that serves as his throne. But it's the same cast of characters, isn't it, for all intents and purposes? We see the same, or at least very, very similar elements described in different ways, and that has helped us to understand a little bit better the picture that we read in Revelation 4. It's not that God was, through John, revealing new information, at least up to that point. The point was certainly not to tell Christians, here's what God's throne room looks like in heaven. If they know the Old Testament, then they already know this stuff. What's important is what has changed, and what follows. Let's move on to the 4 horsemen from Revelation 6. The horsemen actually are just 4 of the 7 seals, and they are enough to startle us, not least because these horsemen seem to be supernatural beings, whether of heavenly or hellish origin is not completely clear. We're confused by this, and we're left fumbling for interpretations until we look back to Zechariah. As we've seen already, practically all of these players and even inanimate objects involved in chapters 4 and 5 are not being introduced for the first time. They're making a second or a third or a fourth appearance after showing up in the Old Testament, like Isaiah or Ezekiel or Daniel. We read in Zechariah 1, I saw in the night, and behold, a man riding on a red horse. He was standing among the myrtle trees in the glen, and behind him were red sorrel and white horses. This isn't identical, but it's the same idea of 4 horsemen riding horses of different colors in a vision from God. And like us, Zechariah wondered in verse 9, What are these, my Lord? The answer came in verse 10, These are they whom the Lord has sent to patrol the earth. And then again in chapter 6 we read, The first chariot had red horses, the second black horses, the third white horses, and the fourth chariot dappled horses, all of them strong. Here they are again. Now they are chariots with teams of horses, but the 4 divisions remain, and the distinguishing colors too. Zechariah again asks for an interpretation, which is helpfully provided in verse 5. These are going out to the 4 winds of heaven, after presenting themselves before the Lord of all the earth. The specifics have to do with events that are surrounding the returned exiles of Judea and their relations with the broader world. But note that in both cases, the horsemen are servants of God. They patrol and they carry out his will. And it's not always pretty. The number 4 represents God's command of the earth, since they go to the 4 winds, north, south, east, and west. They correspond to the 4 living creatures on each side of the throne, both in Revelation 4:6 and in Ezekiel chapter 1, who instructed the horsemen in Revelation 6, come. They, the horsemen, are carrying out God's will. as scary as it is. Even if the remaining details aren't completely obvious, this gives us a really good start. Then there's the beast from the sea from Revelation 13, and we saw many elements of that vision in Daniel 7. What was the interpretation given there? Daniel 7, verses 15 through 18. As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever and ever. The 4 beasts that arise from the sea in Daniel 7 basically stand for Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Now, in Revelation 13, it's just one beast, but it has the characteristics of all 4 of the ones from Daniel 7. It's kind of focused on the 4th one, though, and it basically stands for the 4th beast in Daniel 7, Rome. That said, there are, of course, echoes of this beast from the sea elsewhere when other regimes behave in the same way that we read about in Revelation. It's the power of the corrupted state instituted by God, but given over to serve Satan and making an idol out of itself. There's plenty more that we could talk about, but I want to flesh out something I covered in last week's show about Satan's use of imposture and parody. I won't rehash the whole thing, but for reference, Paul writes, "For such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness." Last week, and several weeks prior in 2nd and 3rd John, we noted some examples of Satan creating perversions of heavenly things. Revelation takes note of this tactic, and the most prominent symbols throughout the book break down along these lines. The lists that I'm about to show you are a bit like the doctrine of the Trinity. Nowhere does the Bible spell it out explicitly and directly in the terms that we'll use. But once you know it's there, it's impossible to escape the conclusion that God put it there on purpose. So, Revelation 12, 7 and 8. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. Now, this is pretty narrow, but it at least introduces 2 sides of a heavenly war that transcends just chapter 12 here. Both sides are made up primarily of angels. There are good angels and there are evil angels. One side is led by the dragon. The other side, at least here in Revelation 12, is led by Michael, who is an archangel. He's one of only 2 good angels explicitly named in the Bible, although there's one evil, and several others mentioned by epithets and a handful of maybes. But Michael is obviously not the sovereign here, he's the general. On the evil side, the dragon is the general, and he wants to be the sovereign. Who's the sovereign on the good side? Yep, you guessed it, God. I know, it's quite a shock. Knowing all of this, we can populate these 2 sides with other symbolic characters. So, chapter 4, verse 2. At once I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven with one seated on the throne. We've covered this. This is the Father who sits on the throne. Corresponding to him, chapter 12, verse 3. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. This, of course, is Satan, and everything is exactly as we would have expected up until now. Chapter 5, verse 6. And between the throne and the 4 living creatures, and among the elders, I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slain, with 7 horns and 7 eyes. And corresponding to him, chapter 13, verse 1, And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads. And then verse 3, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. Both the lamb and the beast from the sea are objects of worship. They are both empowered by and serving their respective sides' leaders. In chapter 4, verse 5, before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. And corresponding to the Spirit, we have chapter 13, verse 11, Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb's, and it spoke like a dragon, who is further identified in chapter 16, verse 13, as the false prophet. Now, in both cases, the Spirit and the false prophet / beast from the earth are kind of nebulous. They actually carry attributes of the other 2 members of their respective trinities. Both are mostly concerned with proclaiming the excellencies of the second member of the Trinity, the Lamb on the one side and the beast from the sea on the other. In chapter 7, we are introduced to the sealed. Verse 3, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. The seal is not a flabby aquatic mammal, it's rather a stamp of authority and ownership and also protection. Corresponding to that, in chapter 13, we read verses 16 and 17, also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is the name of the beast or the number of its name. And then we have chapter 21, verses 9 and 10, come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain, and showed me the holy city Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. The bride, who is Jerusalem, which is to say the church. Corresponding to this, we have chapter 17, verses 1 through 5. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute, who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. And he carried me away in the Spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. Whereas on God's side was the bride and Jerusalem, on the dragon's side is the whore and Babylon. This represents basically, in contrast to the church, the world, and especially the dominant culture of the world, which is subservient to the beast. These are not the only forms in which each of these characters appears in the visions, but they're the most illuminating, and I think they'll go the farthest toward understanding the book as a whole. There's plenty more to Revelation, but these are the things that I could cover in half an hour and that I deemed the most important for you to grasp before even considering a more detailed study of the book. Let's talk about some takeaways. Do you want to understand Revelation? Do you want to understand the New Testament generally? I can make it easy for you. Just go and read the entire Old Testament first. In fact, read it twice. The New Testament becomes a lot easier after that. Don't expect for everything to always line up one-to-one with obvious earthly entities in Revelation or the Old Testament prophecies or just the Bible as a whole. It is worthwhile to get into the details of Revelation, and I have found immeasurable value in many of those details myself. But the big picture is not that complicated. God wins. All that matters for you is to choose a side, and do it carefully, because the beast wants to convince you that he's really the lamb, but you can recognize them by their fruits. If you find that you've been on the wrong side of the war, and you need to wash your robes and join the lamb's side in faith that, despite his looks, he has conquered and will conquer completely, we'd love to help at River Ridge. You can get in touch with us by phone at 812-550-6234 or send us an email at info@riverridgechurch.org. You can also find us at 5600 Van Road in Newburgh for Sunday morning worship at 10. I hope to see you there. Thanks for joining me today on Iron Sharpens Iron.